Now, in this course, I've used many functions. In fact, every program that I've written has had at least one function. That's the function called main. In C, you don't have any choice as to what you call that. Every program must start with a function called main. But your other functions you can call more or less whatever you want. Now, in this lesson, if you're an experienced programmer, you're probably not going to learn anything very new. But if you're a new programmer, then this is an important lesson because it's absolutely essential that you really understand how functions work. All but the most trivial of C programs contain numerous functions, maybe hundreds or even thousands of them. A function is just a named block of code. This, for example, is the main function. And I've also written functions with names that I've chosen, such as in this project I wrote one called readlin. And I've also used functions from the standard libraries, that is, support code that's supplied with a C compiler. One of the ones I've used frequently is the printf function. Functions serve two valuable purposes. First, they let you divide your code into small pieces so that a program of 10,000 lines, say, doesn't just start at line 1 and go right on to line 10,000 without a break. Now, in fact, years ago, some computer languages did exactly that. They didn't have functions, so you had to write line after line of code. And they were incredibly hard to write and also hard to modify and to debug, that is, to find and fix errors. Functions are more civilized. Let's have a look at an example of a program with several functions. So this is from step 5, and it's the project called functions. And you can see there's quite a few different functions that I've written here. So these functions divide my code up so that each function deals with a specific task. Say hello, greet, add, divide, and so on. They all have names that mean something, that describe something about the task that they do. So when I want to modify my code now or fix a bug, I can do that one function at a time. I don't have to worry about a mass of code that is not divided up into discrete bits. The other big advantage is that functions are reusable. If you have a function that does some specific type of calculation, well, you can call that function by name whenever you want to do that sort of calculation. And you can see, for example, here, although this is simple code, it shows the principles. Whenever I want to do a calculation, I can call add, the add function, to do some addition, or divide to do a division. And of course, the code in a real-world program would be much more complicated than in this simple example. But without dividing my code into functions, I'd have to write all the code needed to do that calculation, to do some sort of division or more complicated calculation, time after time after time. I'd have to repeat it. Every time I needed it, I'd have to just do another copy of the code. I don't need to make copies of the code because I put them all into functions, and whenever I need that code to execute, I just call the function. Another benefit of functions is that they help to clarify what each bit of code does. So I can see just from the name that this code is intended to display a greeting because it's called greet, whereas this code divides one number by another because I've called it divide. And of course it's up to me to give meaningful names, easy to understand names, to my functions. Now let's look how to call a function. When you want to run the code inside a function, you just call that function by its name, like this. Optionally, you can pass bits of data to the function. In that case, the data items or variables that are passed must match the items or parameters listed between parentheses in the function. So let's see how to write a function. A function is declared by specifying the data type of any value that is returned by the function. And that could be an int, for example, or a double, or void if nothing is returned by the function. Then comes the name of the function, and you can choose pretty much any name you like, as long as it contains normal alphanumeric characters or underscores, and it doesn't have spaces in the name, and it doesn't begin with a number, though it can contain a number later on. So this would be okay as a function name, and so would this. But this and this would not be allowed. After the function name, you put a pair of parentheses. The parentheses may contain one or more arguments or parameters separated by commas. The argument names are chosen by the programmer, and each argument must be preceded by its data type. When a function returns some value to the code that called it, that return value is indicated by preceding it with the return keyword. Now let's look more closely at my example functions. This, say hello, is a function that takes no argument and returns nothing. And in my code, this is how I call it. Just the name of the function and an empty pair of parentheses and the terminating semicolon. Now this one is a function that takes a single string, an array of char, as an argument, but it returns nothing, so it's declared as void. When I call this function, again you can see that down here, I call it by name and I have to pass it an appropriate piece of data. That's the string here, that's Fred. Now this function, add, takes two int arguments and it returns an int. So the function has been declared with a return type int, and I've returned the integer value following the keyword return. Now this is called again by using the function name, and this time I pass to it two int arguments, and I assign the return value to an int variable. And finally, this function, divide. So this time it takes again two int parameters, num1 and num2, but it returns a double, that's a floating point number. And I've assigned the returned value down here to this floating point or double variable. As always, it's easier to see how my code works by just running the sample programs. I'll do that here. This is 01_functions from step 5. And these are the results. So first of all, I call say hello. That's the function that returns nothing and takes no arguments, and it just displays the string hello. The next function, greet, takes one string argument, that's Fred that I've passed to it here, and that function, if you look at the code, displays hello, followed by the value of the parameter, that is the data that was sent to the function, so it displays hello Fred. Total, this is the integer variable, and it was assigned the result returned from the add function. I passed two pieces of data to the add function, n1 and n2, which were 10 and 3. They were added together. That integer was returned, assigned to the total variable, and that's what's displayed when I display the string down here. And finally, if you remember, I had the divide function. That takes again two integers. This time it's 103. I divide those integers, but I return a double, that's a floating point value, and that's what I display here.